Like I mentioned before, this fret is still a little bit low. This 10th fret here is a little bit low. I'm not going to mess with it because I don't want to take these down any more than I have to, and there's a couple up here that are already starting to get a little bit flat. And I'm hoping that when I put some good strings on here that it'll pull this neck back up a little bit, and so that'll be okay. And then this one down here is obviously still a little bit low. You can see all the black ink still on top of that. But I don't care about that because it's the last fret, so no big deal. The hard way is I'm going to take some of my 600 grit paper. You really want to do this, especially with these what appear to be brass frets on here. You really want to be careful about how you do this. You don't want to go too awfully crazy because you can take a lot of brass off really quick with this paper, even at 600 grit. I want to fold it over a few times so it's kind of thick and padded. And I'm going to get some of my painter's tape, and I'll just use a couple of pieces of painter's tape and just use it over and over and move it down the board. If I was doing a real setup on a guitar or something, or on a really good uke, I would have taken the time before I ever started, before I blacked them in or anything, to go through here and lay tape, between each set of frets and cut it so that it fits and all that stuff, and the whole wood was covered and protected while the metal was exposed. But this is the quick and dirty way when you get doing it on a $45 uke. So okay, so we've got I'm gonna go ahead and lock that focus again. We've got some protection there so that we don't go sanding into the wood and scuffing it up. Although with this 600 grit sandpaper, even if you did that a little bit, it's not the end of the world, because you put a little of that Renaissance wax on it, and it'll probably make it look okay again. But anyway, what we're going to do now is we're just going to take this and we're just going to kind of work it, kind of a little bit of sort of trying to round the edge of that there where we sanded the top with that sanding block. We don't want to go too far, but just a little bit to round it. It'll make the intonation a little better if we can get it where the string is breaking closer to the center of the fret rather than the edge of where we rounded it off before, where we flattened it before. And like I say, I'm not going to be super critical on it, but I want to get it a little bit, Put the magnifiers on, see what we got there. And it's pretty close to back to a round profile. And then we'll just move these pieces of tape down the neck to each fret one after the other. Like I say, I really don't recommend doing this normally, especially on an expensive uke. I would never attack it this way on an expensive uke. I want you to know, of course, an expensive uke wouldn't need any of this. Okay, we're back. Gone all the way down the frets and worked on getting them back to looking nice and round along the top. So if that shows, I've also went back over it with another coat of the Renaissance wax. I ought to get a kickback from these people, but I don't. Okay, anyway, you can buy that from a lot of different woodworkers online. It's the best stuff I've ever used. There's my endorsement for what it's worth, which is probably not much. Okay, that kind of shows up. You can kind of see those notches for the strings. They're just molded in. These nuts on these inexpensive ukuleles are just molded. Nobody ever does any adjustment. They're one size fits all. They stick them in the slot with some glue, and then they put the strings on them. And so what tends to happen is they're all molded the same, and they tend to kind of on these factory ukuleles, they kind of tend to intentionally make the strings a little high, because it's better to have the string be high and out of tune, the nut be high and the string be out of tune, than it is for it to obviously buzz, which if they did them lower, then sometimes they would buzz depending on the fretwork and the action at the bridge and all that other stuff. So they just figure on these inexpensive ukuleles that, hey, if it doesn't buzz, it's good. Well, we've seen in the previous video I did with this when it came out of the box, that good is kind of a relative matter. And well, I won't even say a kid won't notice, because a lot of kids would notice, and that's kind of what why I say these should be set up, because if it doesn't sound right to the kid, they're not going to develop an ear. They're going to lose interest in music. They're going to lose interest in the ukulele. and it'll be in a toy box somewhere collecting dust instead of getting played. If you really want to develop an ear, and if you want your kids to grow up to really appreciate music and not just listen to whatever slop is on the radio, you really need to give them some good tools to work with. Give them good tools. Doesn't have to be super expensive. You know, this is fine. Get one of these, get it set up. That's fine. But don't just buy it from Amazon.com and hand it to them, because if you do, you're going to end up, unless they get lucky and get a good one, you know, you're going to end up discouraging them. Okay, welcome back to Part the Whatever. Not sure how this is going to edit out, but anyway, we're back. It's the following day after I did all the other stuff, and one of the reasons is once I put strings on, I like to let them sit for at least 24 hours before I try to set up, because otherwise you're retuning constantly while you're trying to check the intonation and all of that. There's still, even after a day, there's still a lot of it, but it's not even, doesn't drift anywhere near as fast as it does those first few hours after the strings go on. Also, be using the good tuner when I'm doing this. This is a Peterson strobe tuner, strobo clip tuner. It's not really a true strobe tuner, but it works similar to a strobe tuner in one way, and that's the differences in how precise the display is. These little snark tuners, you may have seen it in my previous video. I've still got one laying around here somewhere. They're great little tuners. They're good enough to get you through. You know, you take them to a jam or whatever, and if they disappear, it's $10. You're not out that much. You're not out a $75 tuner. But you got to understand the difference between accuracy and precision. The snark tuners are very accurate. I think the accuracy specs on them are actually as good as this. The problem is the display can only display a resolution of about 2 cents. So, you know, you may be accurate to 0.01 cents or whatever it says it is, but the display is only capable of showing you in 2 cent increments of, you know, how far off you are. Whereas this works similar to a strobe tuner in that what you're looking for is movement. If there's no movement, then you're dead on. If there's movement one way or the other, then you're a little bit out. So you're not limited to the resolution of, you know, how wide the lines are on the thing and how many lines there are on the display and all that. You're looking for whether the lines are moving or not, back and forth. So that's why I use that when I'm setting up. Now, we talked about before what we're going to do. This is starting from about here out. Is what I typically end up doing on a ukulele, unless it's like a Koaloha or something, and then you don't usually need to do it, or a mainland. They usually come in pretty good. But most low and mid-range ukes, they can, a lot of them can really be improved by doing this. Most of them won't need the fretwork we illustrated earlier. This one probably could have gotten away without it, but there were a couple of really low frets and high frets in here that kind of needed to be dealt with. I did check this with a straight edge after putting the strings back on to see how much it pulled back up, and as you can see, there's not, I don't know, well, you probably can't see on this crummy camera, but there's not much bow in there. It pulled it up a little bit, but not a lot, so it's a good thing that we went ahead and took those frets down. Otherwise we would have had a little bit of back bow dealing with them. We can at least get it in tune. These strings, you know, we aren't set up, we aren't even tuned yet, but these are the Aquila strings. I'm not crazy about Aquila strings on a really good uke because they tend to overpower it and be a little brash. But on something like this, that's a good thing because they give you a lot more volume. And what it is there's two sides to it. It's a I'm sorry, not fret file, nut file. And there are two sides to it. One is 0.026, shows on the handle here. One is 0.026 and one is 0.032. And this file with the two sides will really do most ukulele work, if you are. But what we're going to do is we're going to reach in here and we're going to just lift the string right out of that slot and move it over out of the way. And then we're going to take our nut file and we're going to use the 0.026 into it, which I'll have to get my magnifiers on to tell the difference here. Unfortunately, they didn't. One thing I would have done if I was doing these is I would have had a little arrow on here to tell you which side is which, because 0.026 and 0.032 are awfully close together when your eyes are not great. Okay, so, and what we're going to do is we're going to work this, and we're going to work it, see if I can make this show up. When we work this, we're going to keep a little bit of an angle here, sort of kind of parallel to the way the headstock goes down. And the reason we want that we want to do that is we want the string to break right at that edge of that. When we say break, we're talking about where it comes over the curve, where it leaves contact with the nut. We want it to break right at that edge. We don't want it to break back here somewhere or in the middle or whatever. If we filed it flat like this, if we make that show, if I filed it flat so it was parallel with the fretboard, then we wouldn't, with a little bit of rocking and all that, it might actually be breaking back here somewhere and buzzing against the front part of the fret and things like that. So instead, when I do this, I'm going to work it down a little bit like this so that it's pointed, more towards the headstock. And of course, obviously, as you do this, you have to be careful because you don't want to dig all the paint off the headstock and whatnot. So you kind of got to be real cautious with it as you're working. But that's what we're going to do. Is we're just going to use this file and we're just going to take it. I'm not going to eat up a lot of time on the video with this because it's kind of boring sitting there watching somebody file a slot. But what we're going to do is we're going to work this down, and we're going to work it down real slow, just a few strokes at a time. Put the string back in, check it with a tuner. If it's still out, if it's still going sharp at the first fret, then we'll take a couple more strokes on it. And as we start getting lower, then what I will do, and I will show on this on the video, is as it starts getting pretty close to that first fret, when the string is in its slot and not fretted. Then we'll start doing a check all the way down the fretboard. Make sure that it's not buzzing. Click it pretty good. Make sure we're not getting any buzz on that nut. Don't really need to check it all the way down the fretboard, but we need to click it pretty good to make sure it's not going to touch any of these down the fretboard. Is what I was trying to say. So we'll do that a little bit later on in the video. But I'm going to work on this for a little bit. I guess I'll do a couple of strokes here just to show you what we're doing. If it'll show up in here in the video. So I'm going to go in there. Make sure I got the right size. It's not real critical on the size. The scales are so short on these and the strings are pretty soft, so it's not as big a deal as it is on guitar, where you really want to be real careful about what you get. Getting the slot just big enough. The slot can be a little wide on these without it being any real big problem. But anyway, I'm just going to gradually work it like that. Okay, and I'll go through that. And boy, this is a really soft nut. This is really soft plastic. Normally you have to work at them pretty good. So that's a very soft plastic there. Okay, we'll come back after I've fooled with this a bit. Okay, there's one more thing to show you, and I could pretend that I did this on purpose just so I could illustrate this. But actually, I didn't. It's just a plain old simple mistake that happens occasionally when you're doing these. This nut on here was the softest I've seen. But I made two mistakes that I don't very often make. Actually, one that this is the very first time I've ever made it. And that's if you look really close. Let me unlock the focus on this. If you look really close here, you'll see a little scratch right there, and that's because I was watching myself on the screen while I was filing on the nut, and got the file at a little bit too much of an angle and put a little scratch in the headstock. Sorry about that, whoever gets this. Actually, it will probably rub out with a little of this Renaissance wax. I haven't tried it yet, but if it doesn't rub completely out, at least won't be very noticeable. But if I can't get it out, I want you to tell everybody that right there, that was customized by John. That's a feature that you don't find on. In fact, this is the very first ukulele that's ever had that customization done. So it's very unique. It's probably going to be very valuable. You're going to see it on Antique Roadshow someday. Yeah. And in my spare time, I sell bridges. But the other thing I did was this nut was very soft. I have never seen, that file went through that thing like butter. I've had some cheap guitars, and I've never seen plastic that soft on a nut. It surprised me. This C, if you remember from the video when this thing came out of the box, this C was really, really pulling sharp. The slot was really high, and after like 3 or 4 strokes with the file, it was so low that it was hitting the fret, buzzing. And it actually, The E, I turned around and did the same thing on it. Now you'll notice that I used a blue toothpick there, so I would get blue paint in those slots when I put that nail polish on there. So it'll match. That's another John customization. I don't find those very often. But anyway, what I did there, I've had to do once or twice. When you take a fret just a little bit too low and it starts buzzing. And all I'm doing is I'm building that slot back up. And the easiest way I've found to do that, I've tried several different things. I've used two-part epoxy, and that's a mess and takes forever. I've used super glue. It works okay, and it's fast. This is about the best stuff I've tried so far, and it's what I use on my thumbnail, keep my nail from cracking. And we're not going to be able to get it to read it. There it is. It's Nail Aid Maximum Iron Hardener, and I'm sure there's probably other things. It's basically a clear nail polish that's supposed to be super hard, and it is. I have found with that on my nail, if I use an emery board or a file, I'll actually ruin files really fast, fingernail files really fast when that stuff is on my fingernails. It really is some hard stuff. But anyway, it works great in the slots. The only thing is, you have to let it sit in there for quite a while before you put the strings back in. I discovered it the hard way on my fingers when I was using it on my fingernail. I would put it on, and then 30 minutes later it would feel like it seemed like it was completely dry and everything, and I'd start playing, but the strings would start scraping off my fingernail. And what I found was it takes a good 2-3 hours to dry. Basically, when you're using it on your fingers, you have to wait until your fingers don't smell anymore. If you hold them right up to your nose and you can't smell any of the smell of the nail polish before they're hard enough that that it's fully cured. And so I have put a little bit of that in here into these two slots where I went just a little bit low. It wasn't terrible, and unfortunately it kind of illustrates how bad these frets were, because I'm thinking I maybe should have taken these frets down even a little bit more, because it was not quite perfect on the intonation here when it started buzzing, and the E is trying to be buzzy even when it's fretted at the first fret, which means it's a problem, with the frets not being completely level, even though the action is moderately high back here at the back. So I'm definitely not going to adjust the action at the bridge. We will leave it alone and call it well enough. If I was gonna, if this was more of a ukulele, I would put more into trying to get it right. But I'm not going to make a career out of trying to turn a dolphin into a, super ook or anything. So anyway, tomorrow when that stuff is fully dried, we'll go back through, and what I've found sometimes is you get that in there. Usually it's just about perfect. You just put a little bit of that in there with a toothpick, or you can use the brush and then a little piece of paper to get any extra out of there. Of course, clean any off around the outside of it. And usually that'll actually be just about perfect, But if it ended up making it a little too high, then you can actually go back in and hit it, very carefully with your file again, or even with some emery, real fine 600 grit sandpaper or something, just to knock it down a little bit. Because these two strings are going to be kind of iffy. I'm probably not going to be able to get 100% perfect intonation at the first fret like I would really like to do, because it's going to be buzzing if I do. But I did, before I put this stuff on here and had to leave these strings out, I did actually play it right quick, and it actually sounds like a musical instrument now. With a little buzzing because they went a little low. But as far as the tuning, the intonation goes, it actually sounds like a honest to goodness musical instrument. The G does not make me cringe anymore. So tomorrow we'll do the final tuning on it, and then I will shoot the video for the contest. And we'll see who gets to win this little beauty with the customized headstock.